Okay, we're over here at the table saw. This is a SawStop table saw, so it has a couple of extra features that we will get into. But for right now, let's just get into the basics of a table saw. Obviously, it's going to have a table. It's going to have a fence. It's going to have a guard, which covers up the blade. It's going to have some type of kickback pawl that'll keep board from kicking back into the operator or behind the operator. It's not guaranteed, but it's there as a safety feature. The guard covers up the blade pretty well with regards to not allowing you to touch it in any way. Behind the table we have a guide here which allows us to move the fence back and forth as necessary. That guide also has a measurement rule on it that will allow you to set the fence the appropriate distance from the blade. We are behind or underneath the rule. We have the on and off switch. There are two on and off switch with the table with the SawStop. The yellow one, which you're going to flip up and you will get a green light, and then a large push stop which allows you to turn on the actual blade. If you do not turn on the small yellow on-off switch, you're not going to be able to turn on the large on-off switch, okay, or push switch. Okay. When setting up the table saw, we're going to be cutting this piece of material, this board stock. It's a plywood. It's about 1/2 inch. When you're setting up the table saw, your first piece is making sure the height of the blade is the correct height. The correct height is 1 tooth above the material. You do not need to go any further. To set the height, you'll go to the wheel directly behind the table saw and you'll crank up or down to raise or lower the blade. The other crank on the table saw off to the side underneath the power on off switch will change the angle of the head just like we did on the miter saw. And so you can change the angle so that you can do a long bevel rip along the material. The table saw is designed to cut with the grain, whereas the miter saw is going to go against the grain or through the grain. The only exception being panel stock, like this plywood, where grain is intermittent or interlaced to create a strength. But you will go with the grain. So again, with the grain is going the long way, generally, the long way. Again, checking grain structure whenever you're going to go through material. So what you're going to do here is you're going to set your height. Yep, we've got that one height above. We're going to make sure that that's cranked down and in place. Yep, we're good with that. Then we're going to check our distance. The distance that you care about is the distance between the fence and the blade. The fence and the blade. Everything else is considered waste. That's because the kerf, the material that's going to be turned into sawdust, all right, is basically on that side of the waistline. Many students take the time to draw out their waistlines on stock material that's going through a table saw. That is not necessary. All you need to do is set the distance between the fence and the blade. So in this case, we're going to make a 3-inch cut. So I'm going to measure and set the fence so that it is 3 inches. I never trust the guide on the back. It's really, really close, but it's become worn recently, or in the recent years. So I always check with a tape just to make sure that we're at the distance that we want. So I'm 3 inches. The next piece while I'm setting up the saw is checking to make sure that the guard is in place, make sure the ribbing knife is directly aligned behind the blade. That knife is going to make sure the wood splits and goes out of the way. And then the anti-kickback materials are in place and engaged. Okay, so I have the fence in place, the guard in place. Everything else is locked up. Okay, I am going to turn on the machine because I've been doing all of those adjustments with the machine off. So I've turned that on. I have my green light. Now it's about setting up and making sure I have the right pieces in place. I'm going to get my tape measure off to the side on the opposite side of the fence. I have my push stick, just in case. This is 3 inches. Your hands are not allowed within 6 inches of the blade. So you have the large throat plate, you have the guard, but you want to make sure that your hands are outside of 6 inches. So if you're looking at the table, you'll see that there's a miter gauge trough or groove cut. Basically, if you keep your hands outside there, you're outside your 6 inches. Now, the other piece that you want to do is check to be where you're standing. Never stand directly behind the blade. That's where the kickback zone is. And even though we have that anti-kickback feature, you never want to trust that. You want to make sure that you're taking safety upon yourself. That's your mindset. Some people like to be behind the fence and then they're out of position this way, because when you're pushing the material, you have to keep the material up against the fence. It just seems awkward that you're reaching over the fence and pushing the material into the fence. It definitely provides that protection, but then you can get some twisting in the material and you can actually cause kickbacks more regularly. So what you want to do is have the material placed between the operator and the fence so that the material can go back out of the way. It's not going to strike you. The fence is going to provide that easy direction where I'm able to push the material into the fence. About 30% of my force is into the fence. The rest of it, 70%, is going forward and cutting the material through the blade of the table saw. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm, kind of vectoring, keeping my material up against the fence, because the fence is what's going to help me make sure that I get my accurate cut in between the blade and the fence is where that material that I care about actually exists. Everything else is just waste. A lot of people try to leave the waste in between and leave the material on the outside. That's not correct and inaccurate, and you'll get an inaccurate cut. So I've got the fence, I've got my material, I've got my push stick so that I can push material through and onto the floor. I do not have a partner in this situation. I can have a partner help me by taking material. They're not pulling the material through, they're just catching it as it's passed through the blade. And it doesn't strike the floor or anything along those lines. I may need more people. I might need 3 or 4 people, but I, as the operator, if I'm working with a large piece of material that's long, cumbersome, and I might even need to move the table saw to a different location in the lab. It's on rollers, so it can do that. I'm gonna make sure that I'm the one operating, because this is my material, I'm the operator, and I'm gonna make sure that this gets done. So I have this in here. I'm gonna turn on the saw. Again, generally we keep it with the air on when we're cutting so that we can suck particulate out of the air. We're only going to do this 1 or 2 cuts, so it's not going to be that big of a deal, but generally it'll be on. It's not on because I want to make sure that you can hear this conversation. I'm going to turn this on. It gets to full speed. Again, the material's not touching the blade when I turn on. In fact, I just have it here. It's up at full speed. I have the material up against the fence. I have the push stick within reach, easy reach. Again, I'm going to decide how fast I cut. The blade is on. How fast I push the material through is going to determine how fast I cut the material. So I push the material, it's underneath the guard. I have my push stick. I'm cutting, I'm pushing, I'm indexing my hand out of the way. Once I'm at that 6-inch mark, I'm out. This hand is not present. And I push forward, using that push stick to get that out of the way. Using my push stick to get that material out of the way. The push stick is sacrificial. I can get this cut. It's not going to be a problem. My hand, I don't want to trust that and worry about that. So that material gets pushed onto the ground and we're done. Turn it off. The saw is going to cycle down. You'll see a flashing green light with the saw stop that's going to tell you that it's cycling down. When it comes to a solid green, it's ready to be turned back on in order to be used again. Now, the saw stop has a couple of additional features. We have an over fence sucking, air sucking material, so we can get material sucked out with this extra guard that we can actually move into place. So I'm able to move this, all right, loosen this up, slide this over, all right, and I can position this so that I'm able to lower this into place and remove material or suck from that standpoint. So I have that option. With regards to the saw, if I want to really make sure I get all the sawdust. When we're talking about the anti-kickback, This is an old anti-kickback guard. It wore out. These are the anti-kickback devices. Basically, the wood passes by, and as it passes by, these hook so that the wood cannot go backwards. It can only go forwards. This is the guard that would cover the blade. You can see that the blade had contacted the guard a couple of times, but not you, the operator, which is the big piece. And this is the knife that is behind the blade that allows the material to pass through on each side and not bind up on the blade. So this is the old one. We have a brand new one, which is going to allow us for a much safer and more comfortable opportunity. Now, I said this, and those features are standard on a lot of table saws. I did say that the SawStop does have an additional safety feature. The SawStop has a microprocessor which is measuring conductivity across the blade. That conductivity can, if it's measured at a certain resistance level, which basically means there's moisture. In this case, it's thinking that that's blood because it's cutting you, will engage a safety feature where it will shoot a large aluminum block into the metal at the same time simultaneously rotating the blade out from the material and into the saw. So this was a long time ago, actually. This was 7 years ago, where a student was actually using a material that was really wet that they had brought in from lumber that they had brought from their home that had been outside. It was really wet, and so when it touched this blade, the blade sensed that there was water or some type of liquid that had a resistance level that was agreeable with regards to the index that they had set the parameters, and so it discharged this aluminum block, stopping the blade, and then it swung out from underneath. That only took a few thousandths of a second to take place, and again, that's a great feature, but I don't trust features. Features fail. So I always work with my best safety practices. This feature's in place just in case those safety practices break down. But again, it's up to you as the user of this table saw to protect yourself, recognizing that the guard, the distance, the saw, the fence, the push sticks, and then your location are all things that you can control to allow yourself to be safe with this table saw or any table saw. You should never be removing guards to operate this saw, and you should absolutely be working with a partner if necessary with longer material, or partners if necessary with larger stock or cumbersome stock that you need some support with. This table saw, again, you set the fence, you push the material through. You do not need to do any scribing or lining. You just need to know your distances, set that up, and go. You cannot rip material that is less than 1 inch in thickness. That's the limit to this guard and table saw setup, so please make sure that you're thinking about when you're constructing what size and shapes of materials that you're going to be working with. If you have any questions whatsoever about this table saw, please make sure you see me as the instructor or any instructor with regards to any questions that you may have in terms of overall success with using this tool. Thank you, and we're moving forward.